We just celebrated Dan Hurley's decision to stay in college basketball, but good news, it's not just a major coach sticking around. There's a higher than normal group of returning All-Americans as well.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, what's up? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, the only daily national college hoop show out there. I'm your host, Isaac Schade, and you're joining us at the place to get your college basketball content every single day. Thanks for making us your first listen or watch, and I want to remind you that you can get every episode ad-free on Amazon Music. Special shout out to all of you everydayers out there and all the members of the Locked On College Basketball Discord. This episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Coming up on the show today, we're going to take a look at these 5 AP All-Americans that decided to return to college basketball this year. We're also going to look ahead to the upcoming season, and I'm just going to speculate on some guys that I think might join them on the All-American list this upcoming season. And then we're going to wrap up the show by discussing why they may be coming back, if I think it's a trend or a one-off or what we're seeing with that. So going to be a fun show today, talking some of the best players in the land. So last year's 15 All-Americans, right? There's 3 All-American teams. I'm not talking honorable mentions, just the 3 teams. First team was RJ Davis, Zach Edey, Dalton Connect, Tristan Newton, and Jamal Shead. Second team, Hunter Dickinson, Kyle Filipowski, Deron Holmes, Tyler Kolek, and Mark Sears. Third team was Johni Broome, Jaden Ledee, Caleb Love, Baylor Shireman, and Terrence Shannon. Now, we often typically get back, at least 1, 2, 3 of these guys. But I started on Tuesday just looking at these lists. I was just happening to look back at the All-American list, and I realized, you know what? We are getting back 5 of last year's AP All-Americans for college basketball this upcoming season. It's RJ Davis, who was the first teamer, 2 off the second team, Hunter Dickinson and Mark Sears back to Kansas and Alabama, and then 2 third teamers, Johni Broome back to Auburn and Caleb Love back to Arizona. Now, that's a nice little 5-some you could take right there. It'd be funny. A loaded backcourt where you get Caleb Love and RJ Davis back together along with Mark Sears. I mean, that is a dynamic 3-guard lineup with, I guess you'd play Johni Broome at the 4 and Hunter Dickinson at the 5. Yeah, I'd rock with that unit. But what's interesting, a couple of things. As you look at this list, 4 of these 5 guys have all transferred at some point in their career. RJ Davis has played his entire career at North Carolina. The other 4 have been elsewhere at some point before arriving at their current schools. But what unites all 5 of them, aside from the fact that they were AP All-Americans last year, is the fact that all 5 of them are going to be 5th-year utilizing their COVID eligibility players in the 2024-25 upcoming season. That's really interesting to me. And is, obviously an outlier because after this year, we lose that COVID eligibility. But I started to wonder, I know it feels like the last year or two, it's not been that many AP All-Americans returning to school. I wonder what the concrete numbers are. So I went back and looked. And yeah, I mean, it takes a while to do each year. So I only went and researched the last 5 years, but I'll give it to you. Each of the last 5 years, we have not come close to touching 5, or exactly 1/3 of the reigning AP All-Americans. This past season, 2023-24, we had 3 AP All-Americans back. It was Zach Edey, Armando Bacot, and Tyler Kolek. The year before that, there in 2022-23, we had 2 back. That was Oscar Tshiebwe and Drew Timme. Obviously, Tshiebwe at Kentucky and Drew Timme at Gonzaga. 2021-22, we had 3 back. That was Kofi Coburn at Illinois, Hunter Dickinson still at Michigan at that point, obviously, and Drew Timme at Gonzaga. 2020-21, Luka Garza was back, and Jared Butler was back to Baylor. And then in 2019-20, we had 2 back as well. That was Marcus Howard back to Marquette and Cassius Winston back to Michigan State. So the last 5 years, we've had 3 returning All-Americans from AP, 2 3, 2, and 2. And I know the difference between 3 or 2 and 5 is not wildly much, but it is a good number. I mean, to go from 2 of 15 up to 5 of 15, that's a big deal, especially when it's been 5 straight years of only 2 or 3. And so I look at this and I'm like, man, in the same way that on yesterday's show we were talking about how good it is that Dan Hurley is back. One of the things that men's college basketball in particular really struggles with right now is name recognition, is like absolute dudes. Women's college basketball is slaying us in that. Now we'll see how that holds up next year with players like Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese gone on to the next level. But I mean, infinitely more globally identifiable are players like Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese. Now we know, those of us, if you're here listening to a college basketball podcast in mid-June, you know all these names and you're in on it. But outside of us, diehard, passionate college basketball people, there's not a ton of these household names. And if and when there are, they're off to the NBA draft after a year or two. So they don't necessarily stick around to be these household names. But man, this year, again, we get 5 of them back. And I think that's so important for our sport. And I think some of these are going to be pretty recognizable names. Caleb Love is the reigning Pac-12 player of the year. Obviously, he hit one of the most iconic shots in college basketball in the past 3-4 years with that shot over Duke in the Final Four. His backcourt mate on that team, RJ Davis, is the reigning ACC player of the year, was phenomenal last year. He's back. Hunter Dickinson, right? Like, he's a big personality. He's engaging. He's kind of a character. I think him being back again is notoriety. Mark Sears with Alabama getting as far as the Crimson Tide did this year. He became something more of a household name. And I think Johni Broome, I would say, is probably the least broadly known of this quintet, but I think that he is still well known and will become even more well known this upcoming year. To me, Zach Edey was the biggest player in our sport the past couple years, like literally and figuratively. And so got to kind of replace that. I think Cooper Flagg's obviously going to help with that, but he's not part of this conversation that we're having specifically about returning players. And so I'm encouraged by this to get all this talent back. A lot of the returning guys that could leave in the past couple of years have been bigs. And so to get, not only are these 5 young men coming back, but 3 of them are guards in Mark Sears, Caleb Love, and RJ Davis. So again, really, really good stuff for college basketball. I'm excited about that. Now, what I want to do is look ahead to the upcoming season and speculate. Along with these 5 AP All-Americans returning, who are some guys that I think are primed to make an AP All-American team that didn't make it last year? I've got 10 names for you of returning college basketball players that I think could be AP All-Americans this season. We'll dive into that in just a second. Right after I tell you about game time, the NBA Finals are rolling right along. The Mavs are down 2-0, but they're going home, and maybe you want to go get into that game tonight in Dallas. Well, great news. Games on the game, or prices, on the Game Time app actually go down the closer you get to tip off. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. Well, as I said, NBA Finals Game 3 is tonight. I just found a ticket. I looked right before I started recording for $448. That's right. You can get in the door to American Airlines Arena for $448 to an NBA Finals game. There's a couple flash deals going on right now as well. Section 327, row T. It's on sale down from $600 to $514. Or in the lower level, I found one for $242 off, from $1,698 down to $1,456 on the lower level, not even in a corner. That's great. Go get in on that action. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download their app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Terms apply. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. All right, we just discussed the 5 AP All-Americans from last college basketball season who are returning to college basketball this year. What I want to do now is start looking ahead a little bit, and I know we'll have much more in-depth conversations on a very similar topic to this as we get closer to the season. But I want to look ahead and speculate 10 other returning college basketball players that could find themselves on an AP All-American team next season. And I'll go ahead and tell you this right out of the gate. I had a ton of trouble, but also a lot of fun trying to narrow this down because there are a whole lot of really, really good college basketball players returning next year. This is great. I mean, you remember how many guys pulled out of the NBA draft right at the last minute, all this stuff. So, all that said, I'm going to name 10 players for you. And even in so doing, I'm leaving off a ton of very, very deserving basketball players who very well could find their way onto this list. I should also give this caveat. I limited myself to returning college basketball players. So with apologies to Cooper Flagg and other electric freshmen coming in this year, you will not see any freshmen on this list. But here's my list of 10 in no particular order. I'm curious who you think might find their way onto an AP All-American list this season. Would it be any of these guys, or are there others that you would add? So again, no particular order, but I'm going to start with Alex Karaban, who was one of those players I just mentioned that pulled out at the last minute, headed back to UConn, where he is a redshirt junior. And part of this is I think I might still have him on this list, even if Dan Hurley had left. But Dan Hurley coming back really, really makes me want to have Karaban on this list. I think he's just going to have a breakout year. He's already been really good in college basketball. But as some of the other stars have moved off each of the past 2 years, man, he is primed to thrive this year. Second, I want to go with Graham Ike from Gonzaga, a redshirt senior, who was an AP honorable mention last year, but I think just takes an even another step forward this season. I think I'll say this a lot this offseason. Gonzaga right now, I do not know why, but is being not talked about very much. And I don't know if it's just because they didn't need to do much in the portal or what it was, but good grief. I think they're going to go off this season. I think Graham Ike is a big reason for that. Next, third on my list here is Creighton big man and fifth year using that COVID eligibility, Ryan Kalkbrenner. They obviously lose Baylor Shireman. They lose Trey Alexander at Creighton, but they've still got some really good talent on that roster. And I just think, they have their other 3 starters all back. And so I really think that Coach McDermott needs to focus in on Kalk this year, use him well, and allow him to just have a breakout year. Also, he was an AP honorable mention last year. Next, fourth on my list is LJ Cryer. Speaking of AP All-American honorable mentions, he was another one of them. He stays at Houston. Remember, he's not at Baylor anymore, is at Houston, and Houston just keeps having these guards who just, have big years. Marcus Sasser, Jamal Shed, on and on and on and on. And I know LJ Cryer's a little bit of a different guys, but I just think year 2 in Houston, where it's even more him stepping into it. It's his 5th year as well. LJ Cryer, I would have on this list. Number 4 is one of the nation's leading scorers this year, who is, the first 4 players on this list have all returned to the same school they played at last year. This player is a transfer, and he's following his daddy to the Big 12. Tucker DeVries is going with his dad, Darren DeVries, who's the new coach at West Virginia, transferring from Drake. And he will be a senior. He was an AP honorable mention last year. Man, I just think DeVries is going to go off at West Virginia. I know that the Big 12, that West Virginia is a massive step up from the Missouri Valley Conference. But what Tucker DeVries does, I fully believe will translate to the next level. So keep your eyes on that. Speaking of going from mid-major to a new school, this is another player following his coach, not his dad this time, but following his coach to a new location, and that is Great Osobor, who was at Utah State last year with Danny Sprinkle. They're both headed up to play for the Washington Huskies. No longer in the Pac-12, though. They're obviously going to the Big Ten now. Great Osobor is a senior, another one of these AP honorable mentions last year. I expect him to have a very, very, very good year playing for the Huskies this year, and excited to see what he does, continuing to follow Coach Sprinkle around the country. 7th on my list, this is a guy who loses the back-to-back National Player of the Year in Zach Edey, and that's Braden Smith. Braden Smith, hard to believe, but he is going to be a junior at Purdue this year. Was an AP honorable mention player last year. It's well documented that he and Fletcher Lawyer had a better than expected freshman year, but were a big part of the reason for the loss to FDU in the 2023 NCAA tournament. Smith in particular took a massive leap forward this year. He's a smaller guard, right around 6 feet tall, but just has the ability to put up triple double-ish numbers on a nightly basis for Matt Painter's team. And so I'm very excited to see that and how it comes together. I think Braden Smith is another one of these that will take a big step forward in his junior season for the Boilermakers. Next, 8th on my list is Tamin Lipsey at Iowa State, another junior and another AP honorable mention from last year. Man, the Cyclones are in for a year in Ames, Iowa, and I think Tamin Lipsey is a massive reason why that's going to happen. 9th on my list, 2 more to go, and they're both transfer players this year, is Norchad Omier, who is leaving Miami and headed to Baylor. And he's another one of these 5th-year players. Obviously, Omier and the Hurricanes did not have a great year coming off of their Final Four run 2 years ago. Omier himself was still good, but I expect that him going to Baylor, where he will play with all sorts of great talent. He's getting Jeremy Roach in to play with. VJ Edgecombe is going to be one of the best freshmen in the country this year. I just think a fresh start for him after what happened last year for Miami is a really good thing. I love Norchad Omier. He's one of my favorite players in all of college basketball. He could very easily find his way onto one of these lists next year. And the last player on my list, drum roll, is another transfer, another 5th-year player. It's Johnell Davis, who transfers from FAU to join John Calipari at Arkansas. And look, I know Arkansas is going to have a ton of Kentucky talent incoming, and those guys are heralded, highly ranked, highly recruited college basketball players, including, some of these elite freshmen coming in. I know Jonas Adu coming in from Tennessee, all of that. Johnell Davis is just an absolute dude. And kind of similar to Miami. I know that FAU didn't have the year that they wanted to after their Final Four, but I fully expect Johnell Davis to keep doing things. And again, I think a change of scenery might be a good thing for him as well. And I think it's one of those things where Coach Cal just says, my man, go have fun out there, run this thing, let's get it. And they're going to have a great year in Fayetteville. So that is my 10. Let me just run back through the names one last time. Alex Karaban at UConn, Graham E.K. at Gonzaga, Ryan Kalkbrenner at Creighton, LJ Cryer, Houston, Tucker DeVries at West Virginia, Great Austin, Washington, Braden Smith at Purdue, Tamin Lipsey, Iowa State, Norchad Omier at Baylor, and Johnell Davis at Arkansas. So if you've got other names to add to that list, or you think I'm just off my rocker on mine, I would love to hear who you would add to that. So the question coming next, 1/3 of last year's AP All-Americans are returning to college basketball, the most we've had, as I said, in the last 6 seasons. The question for me, is that a new trend? Or is this an one-off outlier? We're going to try to figure that out and answer that question in just a second. In the 2024-25 college basketball season, we get back 5 AP All-Americans. The previous 5 years, it had been 3, 2, 3, 2, and 2. If anybody out there is super enterprising and you want to go back further than that, be my guest. I'd love to know the last time we had 5 or more returning AP All-Americans. If I find some time, I'll do it. But if somebody else out there wants to, please do and let us know. I'd love to see the spreadsheet of it. But the question I want to finish off the show with today is trying to take a look at, hey, is this just a weird outlier that just happened this year? Or are we starting to see a trend that we might have more and more and more? Well, it's hard to yet see a trend because it's just 1 year of it happening. But I want to try to think about some of why it might happen. Let's acknowledge right off the gate that some of this is just the randomness of why a player left. For example, sometimes you're going to have more players that have run out of eligibility, right? Like in this day and age, you know as well as I do that we don't have as many freshmen making massive impacts because of the transfer portal. The guys that are making the biggest impact in college basketball are often experienced veteran players, and those are the guys that are going to get these All-American accolades. So that's something. So I just say all that to say part of the randomness of the number of returners is depending on why they left. Were they early entry because they wanted to go to the NBA draft? Were they just out of eligibility and they couldn't play anymore? Which right now is that's going to change a little bit. Was it just like, hey, I wanted to go play somewhere else, not yet in the NBA, maybe heading off to not G League Ignite anymore because that's done and gone, but maybe Overtime Elite, or go ahead and go overseas down to New Zealand, or like Philip Petrusev left Gonzaga a couple years ago but didn't go straight to the NBA. I think just went back home, if I remember correctly. So you get all these things, and that's part of the randomness of these returning guys. I want to say one thing that I think is a factor that has an effect on why I think we will see this as a trend is, quite frankly, NIL. And I know there's a lot of NIL that's like, oh my gosh, Isaac, this dumb thing is ruining our lives off the court. And I get it. Yes, absolutely. But we have to recognize the good that NIL is doing to kill the G League Ignite program, to keep guys coming back because they recognize, oh, I can get just as big, somebody like a bunch of these guys that are coming back that we mentioned, or guys like Coleman Hawkins or Jameer Watkins. We didn't even talk about him. Guys that could have stayed in the draft. It's like, you know what? I'm going to come back. And I think NIL plays a massive role in that, because some of these players, their earning potential is better right now than it will ever be the rest of their lives. So if I could get 2 million or 1 million and play college basketball, that's more than I will probably ever make trying to play in the NBA. Maybe I could go play overseas and make that much, but I got to take advantage of this earning potential while I can. So I think NIL helps. And, we're going to have to see this play out over more years, but I think it can help bring more of these guys back. Another factor is that this is the last year we're going to have players utilizing COVID eligibility. The players that were seniors last year, like these 5 returning AP All-Americans in RJ Davis, Mark Sears, Caleb Love, Hunter Dickinson, and Johni Broome, they were all seniors last year and using COVID eligibility. They're the last class that has the ability to do so. We might see some that end up having redshirt issues or medical redshirt issues, but even those, I don't know that the NCAA is going to grant that, which is something similar to what's happening to N'Faly Dante right now at Oregon, right? Trying to take advantage of it and just can't. So legitimately, after this year, that COVID eligibility is done and gone. And, so that's going to play a role too. There's a smaller pool of players in totality. And I'm curious to see how that affects who's on these All-American lists, what they choose to do after college, and all that kind of stuff. So, there's just a bunch of factors, both external and internal, that go into do these players come back. But I think one thing is for certain: we will continue to see more players that can come back because of eligibility decide to come back because they can make bank in college basketball. Obviously, players that don't have eligibility, the decision's out of their hands. They can't help it. So I think we will see more because of that. But also, I think we might not see as many because of the truncated pool of players that have remaining COVID eligibility that's gone now. So I'm certainly very hopeful that these 5 players is the beginning of a trend of having a bunch of players coming back to college basketball. We'll keep our eyes on it. But I do know, as I said earlier, that it means great things for this college basketball season, that we got a bunch of talent and hopefully a bunch of household names making their way back to college campuses this school year. And I cannot wait. I know it's the middle of June. What do we got? July, August, September, October, November. We still got 5 months till college basketball starts, at least games. And baby, bring it on. It can't come soon enough. All right, thanks so much for tuning in to the show today. If you're not subscribed to the show already on audio and video, go ahead and make sure you do that. on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, but also hit the bell button. So if we go live or things like that, you will get a notification and can tap right in. If you're not part of the Locked On College Basketball Discord community, we'd love to have you. The link for that's in the show notes. It's free to join. Come on in, man. It's a great conversation all the time. We'll talk again tomorrow, but for now, I got to say apologies to the Lawyer family. Let's go Wildcats, and until tomorrow, peace.